Hello friends and welcome to another Manchester Jazz Festival special edition of the NQ Jazz podcast, featuring my interview with the incredible pianist Fergus McCreadie. Fergus has been up to the Whiskey Jar a few times and been an absolute storm every time, so we were devastated when his gig couldn't go ahead at this year's festival, but of course we hope to see him back up very soon. Please go and check out Fergus's debut album via his Bandcamp, and of course keep your eyes peeled for his new record coming out at the start of next year, Can, on Edition Records. Meanwhile, please sit back and enjoy my interview with Fergus McCreadie. So, hello Fergus McCreadie, welcome to the NQ Jazz podcast. Thanks so much for coming and joining us. And
hello, thank you for having me.
Real pleasure. And obviously, big shame to not be playing live for Manchester Jazz Festival this
sure.
weekend. But, we will be back in force at some other point. And, I'm sure you'll be back up in Manchester with us at some point soon. Or back down, obviously, if you back down in Manchester at some point soon. So, obviously, our regular audience will know you fairly well now from a few performances. You, first of all, came along and played for us with Matt Carmichael's group. Maybe like the start of last year, something like that.
That would have been last September, I think we were
doing. That recently. So, feels like about 3 years have passed since then.
It does, yeah. Time really has slowed down so much, but so that was last September, and then in January this year, came with my own band.
And both of those gigs were absolutely storming. Matt's was a huge amount of fun, and the trio gig was absolutely blinding. Obviously, we enjoyed it because we asked you back for the festival, so can't put a better seal of approval on than that.
Yeah.
But I also saw an absolute pleasure. And so Matt, to start with Matt's group, he obviously had a big crowdfunding push for his album, and did really well with that. But I saw that was due to be recorded in March. Did that manage to go ahead before lockdown kicked in and all that?
Actually, yeah, it did, and it was. Funnily enough, it was the very last thing that I did, very last bit of music playing with other people I did before lockdown actually got announced. So we recorded. It was quite far away. We did it in a studio in Hastings so we could go and get a nice piano, because for some reason, like, nice pianos and nice studios haven't quite managed to meet yet in Scotland. But so we went down to Hastings, and then as we were coming back, we were sort of all saying, or on the night before we left even, we're sort of all saying, this is probably the last thing we'll do. And that was it. So, but no, it was good to get it recorded though, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that managed to just get in under the closing gate, fantastic. Yeah, really looking forward to hearing that. Are you, obviously you have to say you're happy with how it sounds, but you enjoyed the whole thing, happy with how it's
no, absolutely. I genuinely do think I'm really happy with how it sounds as well, because I think it's kind of, he's waited quite a long time actually, because he could have done it. He's had enough tunes and he's had the band together for like quite a few years now, but actually he's chosen to do it. But I think the band is like sounding really gel together. His like compositions all like tie together really nicely into like a whole thing of music. So no, I am really happy with it. I think it's a good record.
Yeah, well, it was certainly a great gig, and Matt's got so much energy and buoyancy in his playing.
Yeah,
and I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, but it feels to me like you maybe approach music from a slightly similar place. You're both really steeped in your tradition in Scottish folk music. You clearly both have a deep appreciation for that comes through. Very prominently in your own project, certainly. So it feels
definitely
like you gel well.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. It's like I think Matt, more than any other musician, is like the most similar musician to me that I've met. Not to say that other musicians that means he's better than other musicians that I play with, but I always find like, even with like the music we listen to. I remember a couple of months ago, I was getting really into this singer. Aoife O'Donovan, because I obviously like a lot of stuff that isn't jazz, so I like folk stuff, and she's an American folk singer. And when I was getting into her, Matt just messaged me out of the blue and said, "Have you checked out this singer Aoife O'Donovan? I've just started listening to her." It's like that's a really weird moment of like synergy. So there's quite a lot of that, and like enjoying the same music and sort of writing in the same way, kind of trying to melds jazz with sort of Scottish folk, but not in a trite way, like trying to make sort of just trying to make nice music really, rather than something which is either like really cheesy or really like technically advanced and not that accessible. It's kind of I think we're both like looking for the middle ground between those two areas.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely say you're both achieving that very well. So absolutely, and so that leads nicely into then the trio gig you did for us was after you'd released. You'll have to maybe correct my pronunciation. Chorus.
Yeah, that's right. Churas.
Churas.
That's kind of right. I'm sometimes I'm not even sure myself, but Churas I think is right.
And so that translates as journey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And so the concept behind the album being sort of journeying across the Scottish landscape, maybe a bit. That being part.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of it actually took me a long time to come up with a name for the album, and it takes me a long time to name tunes and everything as well. I just really, words aren't my forte necessarily, but I think the more I was naming the tunes, the more I realized that I'd sort of subconsciously been taking quite a lot of inspiration. I know this wasn't something that I was really trying to get into, or I wasn't like, I thought, Scottish word for journey, that'll be a great selling point. I genuinely sort of realized one day, like, that's the theme of this album. That's what this album kind of means to me, is like a journey across places that I like or that I've been to, or that kind of have some kind of emotional resonance within me. So this album kind of maybe is about trying to project some of that emotional resonance to other people. Mm-hmm. So that's when I kind of realized that was the kind of theme. And then I think about 15 minutes later, I found the Gaelic word for journey, and I thought, and it was kind of that. It was just kind of that quick. I was like, oh, that's actually quite nice. I think I'll use that. So
yeah,
there it was.
And it ties in quite nicely for me. The sax player Matt Anderson, he's got an album out a few years ago called Rambling, and it's all about his walks in the Yorkshire Dales.
Oh, cool! Okay. I've not heard of him before, actually. I have to.
Matt's fantastic. He's a gorgeous composer as well, and that album's great. That was the soundtrack to a holiday I had up in the Lake District, which obviously is Yorkshire Dales, but maybe invokes a bit of the same sort of feeling,
Yeah, sure. Similar part of the world for sure.
Yeah, and just big vast landscapes that are maybe a bit hard to come across in England than in Scotland, but but yeah. So I think you would enjoy that coming from the same sort of spiritual place of
definitely
the beauty of the land. Obviously, you've already mentioned and talked about how your Scottish roots are a big influence on your music, and to a degree that will have been something you've sat and conscientiously worked on bringing into your playing. But at what stage, growing up, your influences musically, where did they come from, and at what stage did you decide, this is how you see your sound going forward for your own music?
It kind of was quite roundabout, actually, if I'm honest. So I think I didn't really. I kind of grew up with folk music actually from a really young age. So I moved to a small town called Dollar when I was about 4 years old, or maybe 3. One of those two. And Dollar had a pipe band, and it's had like an award-winning pipe band for years and years and years. So every morning, for a certain part of the year, for like the season, so to speak, I'd wake up and there would be a pipe band playing like way off in the distance. So I kind of grew up like just really liking that sound, and it being kind of being in a rural area as well, that kind of like I connected that with like being in the kind of landscape. And then my mum would buy me these like pipe band CDs, and then these kind of other folk CDs. And I kind of think the younger me, when I was like maybe 6, 7, 8, really liked bagpipes and like sort of folk music and like just the really simple but kind of evocative stuff. And then I think I sort of slowly phased itself out, and then jazz was quite a quick takeover when I sort of discovered that, and I realized I wanted to be a piano player and be an improvising kind of musician.
And then that's kind of what sort of age was that?
Probably about 12 or 13, I think.
Okay.
I went on it was a specific kind of moment. I think I just saw a jazz piano player playing, and I was like, that's it. That's kind of what I want to do. So then after that, I was very obsessively like, oh, jazz is all I want to do. And I kind of even like sort of, and this is not, I wouldn't recommend this as an approach, but I very snobbily sort of pushed other musics away because I was like, no, jazz is the best and I should just listen to jazz because that's what I'm going to do. And when I moved to Glasgow, and sort of started being in a city where actually there's so much music kind of going on, it became harder and harder to ignore the fact that lots of other music was having a pull on me. And in Glasgow, more than anywhere else in the world, I think the Scottish folk music scene is just ridiculous. Like the best musicians in the world kind of live there for that thing.
Yeah.
And so even going out to pubs and like watching like, you know, folky jam sessions, they just call it sessions, but watching them and kind of realizing I really liked that music, I sort of slowly stopped myself from like resisting it and just started to enjoy it again. And that subconsciously, that's when I started writing more folky stuff. And I think it was after a couple of tunes I'd written, I realized, oh, actually, I find it much easier to write something simple, and that means much more to me than trying to write these like hard jazz, like sort of modern, heavy hitting modern jazz kind of tunes, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's almost like it came around in a bit of a circle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it, you know, melody is such a driving factor in folk music, probably more than it is in most contemporary jazz stuff, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where, you know, harmony and rhythm can be the entire basis of a tune, and the melody sometimes maybe even a bit of an afterthought, you know. So I think that fusing those two things together, it gives such a strong melodic focus to material that otherwise often isn't really melodically focused. And I think that's such a defining thing of that album for me. For people who maybe haven't grown up around a lot of Scottish folk music, or even, you know, folk music of any description, who would you name as some influences on you, or people that you think would be great for our audience to check out if they wanted to get a bit more involved in that scene?
It's a really good question, actually. There's such a huge folk music. It's just as much as jazz actually has become a huge, massive, varied kind of thing. So there's a lot of like contemporary stuff to check out, but also there's a lot of like old stuff to check out, obviously. So kind of any if you want to check out some of the pipe band stuff, just any pipe bands that have won the world championships, the sort of ones that play. In fact, you get a lot of these albums, and I listen to these a lot, and they're not for everyone, obviously, because they're quite old-fashioned, but I really like them. And you get these albums which are compilations basically from the World Pipe Band Championships, so the playing is obviously always really good. And it's quite nice because it's like really recorded, even a little bit rough, so you can hear the crowd sort of muttering in the background and stuff, which is surprising because they're so loud, the bagpipes anyway. But you can hear, you know, it's rough, but I think they're really nice albums, so that's worth checking out, definitely. And then for like the great modern bands that I really like Lau is an amazing band. That's with a fiddle player called Aidan O'Rourke, and a guitarist called Chris Drever, and I can't remember the accordionist's name, which is really annoying. But that's like an amazing band, just amazing songs. And Aidan O'Rourke especially is like a really special fiddler. In fact, he did a project with Kit Downs as well, which is also really worth listening to.
I was going to say that our listeners may well be familiar through that side with Aidan. And just on a side note, Emily was doing. So for those of you who don't know, Emily, my partner, is the person who is the sort of the brains behind NQ Jazz, makes it all happen. But she was touring with Opera North, doing sort of mini European tour, but we're up in Edinburgh for a couple of weeks, and she booked into a B&B, and it turned out it was Aidan O'Rourke's B&B. So
that's mental.
Yeah,
that's crazy. I did know he had a B&B actually, but yeah, that's such a weird coincidence.
Yeah, total coincidence. And she'd only really recently been checking out all the stuff with Kit, and was really determined to try and book the two of them to come and play at the Whiskey Jar for us, which hasn't managed to happen yet, but hopefully at some point, you know. But yeah, that was so funny, just stumbling up and seeing Aidan.
It's crazy, what a coincidence. Actually, following on from Aidan O'Rourke as well is a really good kind of obscure album called, maybe not that obscure, but like they only did one album. It's this band called Can, so Kan. That's Aidan O'Rourke as well, and then Michael McGoldrick on whistles, that's a really, really great album as well. And then with Michael McGoldrick, you can kind of go over to is it Michael McGoldrick or Brian Finnegan? I can't remember. But but anyway, that you can go over to the band Fluke. So that's Flook, and that's kind of verging more into Irish territory. But that's like a really great band as well. And there's a lot of connection between Irish and Scottish music, definitely. And then the last band, and this is probably the most important band, the band I've checked out most, is this Irish band called The Gloaming. And actually, in a way, that's kind of what kickstarted a lot of my obsession with folk, because that was the first, I think, folky is kind of what people call the folk musicians in Glasgow. But folky said, "Oh, go check out The Gloaming," and I did, and it was like an instant, like, "Oh, this is amazing." So they're really worth checking out as well.
Fantastic.
So yeah, those are some recommendations.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Fluke and Can as well, and I know I've worked with some of the Can people. Yeah, do you know Ian Stevenson?
I don't know him personally, but actually, Stephen, who plays and who's the drummer in the trio, he met him because he did some recording at his studio, I think, for some reason, for a band of some description, I think. I can't remember what though, but.
Yeah, but Ian's a phenomenal musician. He's like a powerhouse of, massive multi-instrumentalist, but also, just a phenomenal creative force. Just seems to churn out amazing tunes all the time. I did a little jazz folk project with him a few years back that was really fun. But I need to try and resurrect that at some point. And,
definitely.
Yeah, the Gloaming I've not checked out. I need to make that thing.
They're amazing. Yeah, the best live gig I ever saw was The Gloaming, definitely. And I've seen like Pam Thini and stuff, and Herbie Hancock, some of my favorite jazz musicians, and they weren't as good. They weren't as good as The Gloaming. So.
There's something about the audience atmosphere, I think, that's maybe a bit lacking in those two worlds.
Yeah, I think so.
Between the two. Yeah.
I think it's funny in folk gigs, especially at the session gigs as well. Folk audiences are like way more inclined, I think, to like really get involved with the performance. Whereas, and I don't think this is always the case at all. But sometimes in jazz there can be a bit of disconnect where it's like the audience is watching the performer rather than like the two are kind of interconnected. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Yeah. And
for me, that's why I love the fact that we've got a venue like the Whiskey Jar where it feels so intimate and so connected.
Yeah, it's great. Those are kind of the best venues, because even some of the biggest venues, you just don't get that audience connection. But like in a place like the Whiskey Jar, it is so great because you can hear, even if someone in the audience, even if you're playing quite loud, and then someone in the audience quite audibly goes like makes a noise in appreciation of what's like happening. You can kind of hear that. And that's like a good thing to hear, definitely.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We've got quite a vocal audience normally at the Whiskey Jar as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good.
Up for a bit of shouting out. Yeah. Fantastic. So, as I was saying, so the first tune that you've one that you've picked out for us, this is the trio from the Edinburgh Jazz Festival in 2018. This is a tune called Ardbeg. Is there anything you'd like to say by way of an introduction? What's this tune about, or what was it focused?
So this tune, I wrote this tune. This is one of my older tunes, actually. I wrote it in it must have been 2016, I think. And it was September, and that's when in Scotland there's like 5 main jazz festivals in Scotland, and one of them is the Islay Jazz Festival, which is kind of weird because Islay is actually this like really obscure small islands just off the west coast. But we all half the jazz scene in Scotland like packs their cars and goes over to Islay for this jazz festival, and we were playing there, like me, David, and Stephen, the trio, and I had this tune that I'd written, and I was like, oh, I really don't know what to call this tune, which is like not an uncommon kind of scenario. But we were playing in the Ardbeg distillery. And Ardbeg, and Islay is like really famous for its like whiskies. There's like, for an island of like population of 2,000, there's like 8 or 9 distilleries there for some crazy reason. And Ardbeg is one of the best ones, and that actually is my favorite whiskey as well.
We could just like the sponsorship deal.
yeah, that's what I'm hoping eventually will happen. But So we were playing in the distillery, and I was sort of we were wandering around beforehand as well because we had a bit of time. And the whole area was really beautiful, and we started playing the gig, and it just like maybe it's because everyone was like a little like sort of semi steaming because everyone had been drinking whiskey, but for some reason the atmosphere felt very nice, and I think that was one of the things which I think that was a real catalyst to like start doing a lot more with the trio, definitely. And I think the second tune was this unnamed tune, and I just kind of decided on the stage in the moment that like the right tune name for that tune was Ardbeg, so that's how it kind of came to be.
Great. I'm sure that got a good cheer at the time.
Yeah,
Getting
people
into it.
people were happy.
Excellent. Well,
Present at the naming of a tune.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks very much. So this is Ardbeg. Sit back and enjoy. Great, that was Ardbeg. Thanks very much, Fergus. I wanted to ask you a bit more about some of the other projects that you work in. So obviously we've already mentioned Matt and the upcoming album. Do you know roughly what the release date's going to be for Matt Carmichael's album?
For Matt, I actually don't know. I think he was originally planning an October release, but obviously now that can't really happen. So I think it's I don't want to, definitely don't take my word on this, but I
Sure,
think
yeah,
maybe sort of February, March 2021 is what he's looking at.
fantastic.
That would be
Yeah.
my guess.
Yeah, well, certainly look forward to that. But you're pretty active with a few other groups as well. We had Graham Costello up at Costello. Ah, no,
Yeah, Costello. Yeah,
Costello. Yeah. We had him up recently with Animal Society.
of course.
Joe
Yeah,
Williams, Animal Society, and he's phenomenal drummer, phenomenal musician.
yeah, he's ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah, he tore the house down completely. So his band Strata, you're a part of, and that's got a few releases out now. Is it 2 albums and an EP or something like that?
it's almost it's an EP, which was the first thing we did, an album and a single, which we
Oh,
did
okay.
recently. Yeah.
Great, yeah, yeah. But so yeah, and that's fantastic music. That's much more down this a very different sound world to Matt
Yeah.
Elf's writing.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell us a little bit about that. How did that band come about? So that's a sextet, is it?
So that's Sextet, that's right, yeah. So I think it just ages. That's probably one of the oldest bands that I do. When I was still in college, I was in college at the same time as Graham. Graham was kind of 2 years above me, and I think for his final project, he was going to record an album, or like big part of his degree was recording the EP, which eventually got released. So I think, and Graham's a very fastidious guy. Like he think more so than most musicians actually. He thinks very carefully about kind of every move he makes, whether that's like business wise or like musical direction wise. And I think he thought a lot about who he kind of wanted in the band. And actually the bands back then, that's not the lineup that it is now. It has sort of evolved and changed a little bit over the years. But so he got this sextet together and we recorded the EP. And then kind of after that, he was like, oh, I'd really like to start making this a band, if that's okay with you guys. He actually came to us and asked. And I think everyone was like, yeah, absolutely, that sounds great. And then what he started doing, I think this is like quite unusual for a jazz band actually, but I think it comes a lot from his actual background, which is in kind of the DIY rock scene. But what we started doing as a band is at this like small independent venue called Block, which is like in the center of Glasgow. It's more of a bar than a venue even, but like it's really cool. Like musicians hang out there a lot actually. It's like quite a cool vibey place. And what happened was we started doing a gig every month there. So we had a residency, and that gave us like a good place to kind of develop our sound as a band, if that makes sense. So the more we kind of played in Block, the more we kind of got used to playing with each other and exploring. Because it's like his music is like, it's really, really great. And but it's also quite unusual, and that's not to detract from it. Like unusual music is always good. But I think for me as a piano player, I don't know about maybe the rest of the band, for me as a piano player, it's very different from the other stuff I do. So I had to really learn how to kind of approach it. And it was good that we had this residency, because we had we just kind of knew that even if we weren't touring, we had a gig every month that was always kind of going to happen, and there was always going to be like a decent amount of people there, and it kind of became the thing actually that people started coming to every one, which was nice actually.
Right.
And then kind of the more we did that, and it was kind of the same with Graham as it was with Matt. Graham waited for a really long time before he recorded his album. I think he just really wanted to sit on the music and make sure it was like kind of there. And then when it was there, we went to the studio and did the first album, toured it, and then kept doing the residency. And then we actually had a tour this summer, but that sadly isn't happening, obviously, because of COVID. And we were meant to record a second album as well. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think we were meant to do at least we were meant to do some more recording. So obviously COVID's kind of got in the way of that. But I think where we kind of are now as a band is that we do like sort of bigger gigs now. So like, the jazz festivals, and we've been to Italy, and we were meant to go to Montreux Jazz Festival actually in the summer.
Amazing.
But still we have this residency that we come back to, which is kind of where we hone everything, and where kind of things can be a bit not rough, but things are a bit like fresh, and so it's a chance to kind of hone that. So that's kind of where what that band's kind of gone through, if that makes sense.
Amazing.
A very brief history.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks. And how long has that residency been running for then? Because that's a big thing to
A,
keep that going.
a long time now. It could be. I think it's close to 2.5, 3 years. There's definitely been a couple of months where it's not happened, but I think we got to like gig number 26, I think.
Amazing.
So that would indicate about 2 years, but it's definitely been long, that about 2.5, 3 years, I'd say.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and that's
Yeah.
you know, and when I say that's a luxury, I don't mean that as in like it's easy or anything to make that happen, but it's such an amazing thing to have that fertile ground to.
No, absolutely, yeah, yeah. It gives the band, I think, a very unique personality, because we're so sick of each other, from doing this gig. So.
Fantastic. And so another thing that you do with Graham is Corto Alto.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so that's you've got some like prolific output with that, just in terms of lots of singles and
Yeah.
and a huge amount of material that's gone up and out with that. Can you tell us a bit about Corto Alto, please?
Yeah, of course. So Liam, who runs it, Liam Shortall, he's like a very kind of prolific musician in the Glasgow scene, and he always kind of has been. A lot of it's down to the fact that he's a trombone player, and they're kind of rare, so he sweeps up the trombone gigs. But like, that's not to detract from the fact that he's like an incredible musician, a really great composer, and like actually a really good guy as well. He's definitely one of like my best friends, and like a really just like a good warm personality kind of thing. And I think a lot of people wanted him to like do a project of his own for a long time, but he just never actually did it. And he was always just kind of doing sideman gigs, so that's kind of what he was known for. And then but occasionally I think he would get asked to do these like little gigs, and so he'd do it under the moniker of Corto Alto, and it would be like just the musicians that kind of were available. And I think for maybe the first couple of gigs I wasn't available. But what he started doing about a year and a half ago now, maybe, what he started doing about then was just in his flat, he was recording videos of us all kind of playing and like putting them out every 3 weeks as singles and like videos to kind of watch as well. And it was very organic the way it happened. So we'd kind of show up in his flat, sort of hang for a bit, and then he'd just like hand out the music. We'd like rehearse it a little bit and then record it. So kind of what you hear is like pretty much people kind of not reading it, but seeing it for the first time. So it's actually very fresh. And I think that helps the process a lot. So that was kind of the thing for the band for a while. And the more he's put out those videos, the more he's actually built up a big following. I think this is an okay thing to say, but I think more of a following than maybe anyone else in the Scottish jazz scene in a way, just because he was reaching a lot of people through this really cool video thing, and through this really kind of zany music as well. And then again, COVID kind of got in the way, because we were meant to be touring at the end of March, and then we had some festival gigs lined up in summer, but we're not obviously doing them anymore. But that was kind of the idea of that band. It was kind of his. It's all kind of his vision, but a lot of the time it ends up being different musicians on the videos. Like no musician has been on the same video, if that makes sense. Like I've not been in all the videos, and Graham Costello's not been in all the videos. It kind of really chops and changes. So, but I think that makes it nice in a way. It's like a cool collective of like all the really cool musicians that are about in Glasgow. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great ethos. Just get people together, see what happens in the moment, and put it out. No matter what. And
yeah, definitely. And he always writes. It's always, maybe not always, but a lot of the time he's written like a tune specifically for a person that he has in mind, but that person might not even have played with the band ever before. But that person will come in and like be part of the process for that like one tune, and then that can create some like really cool results. Definitely.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then the last project that well, you correct me if I've missed anything out, but the last thing that you're quite busy with is your duo with Luca Manning.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's obviously doing fantastically well as well. Obviously, Luca himself is doing fantastically well. Phenomenal musician, great voice, and all of that. And I know that a few of our
Yeah.
regular audience members are big fans, and I know have travelled down to London to catch you guys doing some
Uh,
video gigs as well, which is
yeah.
showing true dedication. So Luca's obviously, is he Glaswegian himself, or he's from
Yeah. He's very Glaswegian. He's from the
very
West End.
Glaswegian?
I think he won't mind me saying this, but I think when he goes down to London, he softens the accent quite a lot. But if he's back in Glasgow, and even I even notice it when I'm kind of dotting about with him. But if I'm with him in Glasgow, his accent definitely thickens up compared to like down in London. It's funny.
He has to translate for the Southern.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. So, but how did that partnership come about? And obviously, not just as a touring thing, but you've got an album out together as well. And
Yeah.
how did that all happen?
It all happened kind of weirdly by chance. I think we kind of, because obviously I knew who Luca was when he was starting to do gigs in Glasgow, because everyone was kind of saying, oh, who's this 16-year-old singer that sounds like, that's got a voice like he's 40, and that's like a really big compliment, because like he's always been like a really mature musician. But when he was coming up, I kind of knew who he was, and he would come to like the sessions that kind of I was doing with the college people. I was a couple of years older. So he kind of knew who I was, and we played together on occasion, but I don't think we really formed that much of a duo partnership at that point, if that kind of makes sense. It wasn't kind of until he went away funnily enough, it wasn't until he was living in a different city that we kind of started doing more stuff. So he came back up to Glasgow for the Glasgow Jazz Festival, and we did a gig, and we were supporting someone well known. Georgie Fame is who we were supporting.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Just as a duo act. And I think he came up and he needed someone to accompany. And then what happened was it's weird how much of this story is kind of by chance and it's sort of evolving kind of randomly. But anyway, he came up, and what's kind of recently happened, which was kind of surreal, weird for me, was that a friend of mine, who's also a singer actually, but also like a really good classical composer, had set some words to a tune that I'd written. And I really wanted to do this tune with like a really good singer. And I thought, if I can do it with Luca, that'd be great. So I brought this tune. And it was called The Stones of Brodgar, which is actually going to be on our next trio record. But it was called The Stones of Brodgar, and we played it, and we played some other tunes. We played a tune of Luca's, I think, and then we played some other standards that he likes. And after that gig, we sort of hung out and realized that we were like good pals, but also realized that musically it kind of worked really well. And it's one of those things, I don't even know why it feels really good to play with Luca, but it does. Because he's an amazing musician, and he really listens, which is rare maybe for singers, but it almost feels like I'm playing with an instrumentalist rather than a singer. And that's not saying he sounds like he really is a singer, but he really listens to kind of what I'm doing and then kind of reacts to that. So it's a proper partnership rather than just me being the accompanist, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, slight tangent, but we did this tune, we did this thing at the Glasgow Jazz Festival. We hung out afterwards, and then like a bit after, where he messaged me, he got in touch and was like, I really want to do some one-off singles, and I was wondering if we could do your tune. And I was like, yeah, sounds great. I'd be well up for that. And the more we talked about it, and the more I think he thought about it, the more he realized that I think eventually it just got to a point where he was like, oh, I'll just do an album. Why wouldn't I just do an album? So just like out of nowhere, we ended up doing an album, which kind of we didn't really think about that much necessarily, but it just kind of happened in a way. I think that actually even made it kind of nice. So when we got to the recording session, it was like really, really relaxed. We had loads of time to do loads of takes of everything. There's tunes that are on the album that we hadn't actually planned for. But just like randomly ended up making it on. And then we did a version of Loch Lomond, which we arranged in 20 minutes or something, and then just chucked on the album. So we ended up doing the album, and then we ended up like gigging a lot, and I was going down to London quite a lot to do gigs with him when it was like gigs that could kind of afford my travel, and then he was coming up to do album launch gigs as well, and Yeah, and we had, again, as similar case, but we had some gigs like lined up for the rest of the summer, and obviously that can't happen. But he's definitely one of the musicians I'm most excited to like start playing with again. So
Yeah,
hopefully
right.
that happens soon.
And you'll have to remind me what's the name of that album that you've
Oh,
got?
of course, yeah. Sorry, it's called
No, no,
When
I
the
can.
Sun. It's called When the Sun Comes Out, and that is a track on the album as well. It's a Harold Arlen tune.
Yeah, fantastic. So obviously we've done a whistle stop tour of like all of your extra activities. But so obviously Matt Carmichael's got his first album out. People should go and check that out. And new album upcoming. Graham Costello's Strata got a few bits out there. Go and check those. What's the name of
Yeah.
Graham's album?
It's called Obelisk. That album.
Obelisk. And
Yeah.
Quarto Alto, a ton of material for people to check out.
Loads of stuff. Yeah,
So
loads of stuff.
go and delve deep, and then yeah, the duo with Luca, fantastic. So to return to your own music and your own upcoming things, then massive congratulations in order because you've very recently signed with Edition Records.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh yeah, well, super well deserved. And how? So you've got an album coming up then, obviously with Edition.
Yep.
Presumed due out next year, hopefully at some point. Is
Yep.
that? Did I see the name Cairn?
Yes,
Yep.
so the second album, thankfully, I've decided on it quite well in advance. But Cairn is what it's called.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, actually, I didn't. That's a name. That's the name of one of the tunes that's going to be on the album.
Mhm.
And it wasn't actually my idea. It was Dave Stapleton, who is obviously head of Edition. We were in a meeting, and he said, "Why don't you just call the album Cairn?" And I just ended up really, really liking it. So
Yeah.
that's what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice sort of with both of your albums just having single words is actually quite a
Yeah.
strong thing. That's something that just cuts to the center of everything.
Yeah, I think so.
And
Yeah.
Dave is great for those kind of strong aesthetic choices.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
got a great head for all that. So how did this all come about then? How did communication with yourself and Dave strike up in the first place?
I think we were communicating for a really long time before the signing actually happened, and before we kind of actually even met in person.
Mhm.
But so what happened first was I had a gig. We had a trio gig in London, and I just like popped him a message. I think I was trying to think of like kind of good people to invite, and I kind of popped him a message asking if he wanted to come down to the gig. And at that time, unfortunately, he was busy, but he said he'd seen this. So like a few months prior to that, I'd taken part in the BBC Young Jazz Musician competition, which is so long ago actually. Now that I think
Yeah.
about it, which is weird. But he sort of said, thought your music was really interesting. Then let's stay in touch. Keep me updated with kind of what's going on, if that makes sense. And then kind of over the months, I sort of stayed in touch with him, and just like as he said, just kind of kept him updated on what I was doing. So, and there was a couple of times where I was, because I always knew I wanted to do my next record on a label, and I sort of felt like I sort of wanted to kind of record some like rough versions of the songs that we would record and kind of send them out. So I sent, I remember I got like just a blank CD, put it in my computer. As a trio, we recorded like 4 just like rough takes of new tunes that we've been working on. I put them on the CD, and I hand wrote a letter and put that in a parcel and sent it off to Dave. I think, and that didn't. I'm trying to think of what happened next, but I think he got in touch after that, and sort of again was like, "Oh, do keep in touch," because I think he seemed interested in the music, but he plays the cards a little bit close to the chest, maybe, so I couldn't necessarily tell at that point.
Yeah.
But anyway, it kind of came to the point where, we were staying in touch kind of all over 2019, and it came to the point around, I think, October 2019, where I decided like I really wanted to, like, this was the right moment to record the next album with the other 2 musicians, with David and Stephen. And I think the tunes were a good place, but also like musically as a band, I really wanted to capture where we were, because actually it was quite an exciting period. I just think we were playing together quite well at that point. So in January we recorded the album, and then after that I sent the sort of rough mixes. No, actually, I think I sent the final mixes, the masters, to Dave. and he said, okay, I'm interested in this, but I want to hear you live. So, and it kind of linked up quite nicely that the next month we had a gig in Southampton, which is very close to kind of where he's based. So he came down and saw that gig, and then after that, I think the rest is history.
Fantastic.
So I think seeing us live and actually meeting him in person and getting to really chat with him, that was where it kind of happened. So it was just a long period of like being in touch and stuff, and not necessarily knowing if it was going to happen or not, but developing that relationship anyway, and then it happened. So.
Well, to be honest, it sounds like you've ticked all the boxes for how you're supposed to go about that sort of thing. So, so kudos to you for sticking through all of that. That's brilliant. And so because Churas was a self-released album, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
And so how obviously you're still in maybe quite early days working with Dave and the Edition team, but how did you find self-releasing your debut album, and what were the sort of pitfalls and hurdles and all of that, and how is it looking like it's going to proceed with Edition? Like, what obviously there's a ton of benefits that come from working with a label like that. A lot of pressure off you as well in some ways. How are you finding the contrast and all of that?
I mean, it's a hard question to answer because, first of all, actually, the self-release, it was a while ago, and it kind of happened over I'm quite a disorganized person in reality, so it kind of happened over a long time, actually getting the stuff together to release it. As relating to the experience of self-releasing, I think I was actually really glad that I did do at least one self-release in my life, because I think it's good to know how these things work, and it's good to understand. It's good to not just be blind when you just like send the music off and someone else does the work for you. I think knowing how that kind of end of things works, even if you end up not being very good at it, which I wasn't, I think that is definitely helpful. Mm-hmm. I definitely taught myself. I definitely learned a lot from doing it about the kind of wrong ways to go about releasing an album, just like in terms of promotion and giving yourself enough lead up time to release it, and but there was a lot of things that I enjoyed about it as well. I got to work very closely with designers with the album artwork, which actually ended up being incredibly simplistic, but I really like it. So it's like there was like positives and negatives to self-releasing, but it was a huge learning process, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think, and it's hard to say because, as you say, it is early days, but I think what will be good with Edition is that they'll be able to provide that extra support in terms of like marketing and pushing it out there that it's very, very difficult to achieve if you're just one musician and you don't have you don't have a database of like people to mail out to, and you don't have those really important contacts in the industry, whereas Dave and the team at Edition obviously have that. So I think what the big difference is kind of going to be, it's almost like the big difference will be reaching more people with the music, because that's the infrastructure that they have kind of allows that, if that makes sense. It does sort of, in terms of like the admin as well, the sort of boring techie stuff that you have to do, obviously it takes off a bit of pressure as that as well. But the main thing is that's definitely really great is having, and I've never felt, obviously the process hasn't been going down that long, but I've never felt like it's just like, I'll just give it to them and they won't be involved. It does feel like a team effort. So I think what will be really good is just being able to work in the promotion and work and getting it out to other people with such an experienced and great team and such a great guy as Dave. So
yeah, fantastic. So like I say, massive congratulations. And so is all the music written for that album already? Or you had recorded it? Sorry,
it's recorded. Yeah, it's sitting on this very laptop. Yeah.
Exciting! Great stuff. So that's all written. Are you daring to already look ahead, and are you finding some space and time at the moment to be writing some new music and all of that?
Yeah, actually, I am actually. I've been able to, with all this kind of free time. I think the two main things that I either have been practicing a really large amount of classical music, because I've always wanted to get better at classical playing. I'd really love to do a classical concert at some point, but that's a long way away. But I've been doing a lot of classical playing, and it's either been that or composing actually. And it's just like almost like I've been kind of like jotting down all these little ideas and like improvising and kind of like seeing what comes out and stuff. And it's been a really long time since I've actually written, like been in a period of writing. So that actually, in a way, obviously we'd rather not be in this situation, but it has been a bit of a blessing in a way because I've kind of been able to rediscover why I love writing music so much. So and what we're doing in the trio, we haven't quite got around to this yet, but we're sort of hoping to rehearse things virtually. So I've recorded some solo versions of the new tunes, and they're gonna like record themselves playing over it, and then in that way I can like listen to it and be like, oh, if you can make that hit a little bit louder, and then we can kind of rehearse in that way. So hopefully when we come back to touring and when we come back to Manchester, we'll have a set of new tunes. So.
Ooh, very exciting, fantastic. Oh, that's super proactive. I don't know. No one else has replied yet saying we're still rehearsing as a band.
Well, I wouldn't say rehearsing quite. We've not got round to it yet, but that's the plan at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
They've downloaded the files off WeTransfer, so that's how far we're
that's a big start. Yeah. When you get the ping email back, your files have been downloaded. Excellent.
That's when you know you've got a band that's on it. Yeah.
Exactly. So for our next track, you very kindly played us a tune exclusive for the podcast for our MJF weekend, and this is a tune that's going to be coming out on the new album next year. Can you tell us a little bit about the tune you're playing for us, please?
So this is a tune called Cross Flatlands, and actually. Funnily enough, this was the last tune that I wrote before we went to the studio. I think I wrote it like 2 weeks beforehand or something, and it kind of really heavily features on this left hand motif, if that makes sense. Kind of feels like to me, it always felt like a tune. I kind of wanted to write a tune that didn't really deal in extremes, if that makes sense. So a lot of the tunes I have of like build up to like being super energetic, or a lot of them are very kind of emotionally intense, and I'm trying to make myself very vulnerable while playing. Whereas this one, it's more of just a thing, it just kind of, it happens, and it never it doesn't build to like massive levels, but that's kind of okay. And I kind of imagined it as kind of like, as if you were just like walking over fields, like walking with this like quite flat view around. So I called it Cross Flatlands.
Fantastic.
Just to kind of get along this rolling vibe that I kind of felt from the tune.
Beautiful. So this is Cross Flatlands. Enjoy. Okay, thanks very much, Fergus. That was Cross Flatlands on the upcoming album with Edition Records next year, so everyone keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm sure you will not miss it closer to the time. And so with some solo piano playing as well, we obviously talked earlier about your influences within the folk world, but just to pull back a little bit and talk about your more immediate influences maybe within the jazz world.
Sure.
When I hear you playing, or certainly on the gig you did for us at the Whiskey Jar, a lot of your compositions allow for, quite open harmonic spaces to improvise, and I hear a lot of McCoy Tyner coming out in those kinds of spaces. But maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. But and I really enjoy that because I'm a massive McCoy head. But
Yeah.
but who would you see as your primary influences within the world of jazz and piano?
Well, I mean, McCoy is definitely up there. He's definitely one of the. I wouldn't say he's one of the ones I've listened to the most, but in terms of like listening to him and like trying to take some of his ideas, I think stylistically, he's one of the very few who's got that distinctive a sound on the piano. So like you listen to McCoy and you know straight away that it's McCoy. And I really love the Coltrane albums like Love Supreme and the sort of energy that you get from them. I really like. So McCoy is definitely up there, but in terms of like my main pianistic influences, no one's really been a bigger hero of mine than Keith Jarrett. I find it's just that it's always what I come back to Keith Jarrett, whether like, whether I come back to like a record I know I really like, or I find something else that he's done, because he's got such a massive discography anyway, but whether it's I find something else that he's done that I really like as well. He's just the greatest, and it's almost hard to sum up why I like him so much. But I think he more than any piano player, and this is quite a daring statement to make, but he more than any piano player is a true improviser. Like he really, and it's kind of evidence from his solo concerts, but he really will go out to improvise, and will start from absolutely nothing and will build up like this, like sometimes titanic pieces of like great emotional depth, and it will have come from like no preconception whatsoever. And in interviews you kind of hear him talking about this process, and you hear him say, I like to think of it as like a blank canvas, and he always says, I never have any preconception of what I'm going to play before I play. And I believe him. I really do think that's definitely true, and you can hear that in his music. You can hear the kind of how he's really searching for something, and kind of really following what kind of is guiding him, if that makes sense. Almost like he's really letting the music talk, if that makes, and there's no, I mean, he is quite a pretentious dude, but I mean, in terms of the music, it's never overly cheesy, it's never overly pretentious. It's always just what it needs to be, and what needs to happen always happens, even if it's like surprising. And he's just an incredible, I could wax lyrical for hours, but he's an incredible musician. He's definitely my number one.
I was going to say, have you ever got the chance to see him live?
No, unfortunately not. And I suspect he's stopped playing live now, because he's not a very healthy man anymore. But no, I never saw him live, which is a great shame. Actually, it was the thing I really wanted to do, kind of before it's too late, kind of thing. But I kind of take solace from that, and like there's a big wealth of like videos and an unbelievable wealth of like every album he's released for years now has always been a live album, so you can kind of hear him in concert anyway. And it would have been great to see, like, especially a solo concert. It would have been amazing to see like just music created like in front of your eyes, like beautiful music. But having all these albums that kind of refer to is kind of okay for me. So.
And so, sorry, you were going to go on to name a couple of other things, possibly.
Yeah. If I was going to list some other piano players, I really like Brad Mehldau. I really, really like very much again similar to McCoy. He's just kind of reinvented jazz piano in a lot of ways. And then Bill Evans, I think I take a lot of inspiration from as well, just because a lot for how again similar to Jarrett, a lot for his like deep emotional involvement in the music. Like the way he plays ballads, I think is incredibly special. And then just like for like just a lot of the old guys that were just really swinging, like Oscar Peterson is great. not all Oscar Peterson, but a lot of Oscar Peterson. Red Garland, Wynton Kelly, the old kind of traditional guys. Those are kind of who I like. And then obviously there are some modern guys as well, like Aaron Parks and what's his name, Aaron Goldberg as well. And Kit Downs actually, I mean maybe he'll see this and that'll be really embarrassing. But actually, Kit Downs is a big hero of mine. He plays piano on one of my favorite albums ever, called Time as a Blind Guide, which is like a Norwegian drummer called Thomas Dronen. That's his album, and that piano playing I think is really good. So
I've listened to that.
He's the one as well.
Definitely have to go and check that out.
It's really good. That's definitely a big album, because it's not obvious, and he doesn't say it in the titles, but like it's very, very, very Norwegian, that album, and it's definitely takes a lot from the kind of Norwegian culture, and that was one of the albums I think that made me realize that would be a really great thing to do with Scottish culture as well, because both those cultures are very strong in their folk music scene, if that makes sense. But that's a really great album. I'd really recommend that.
Yeah, I mean, Norway, for me, other people may well disagree, and have a more knowledgeable background. But for me, Norway was one of the first countries that really stamped its own identity on jazz music outside of it being an American phenomenon. Like,
yeah, of course, absolutely.
For decades, you can immediately hear, oh, that's a Norwegian recording.
Yeah.
And
no, I definitely agree with that. I feel like you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that disagrees. I even think now, like even now the Norwegian sound is kind of dominant. Like, how many countries can you name where you listen to a jazz musician from them and you can kind of tell where they've come from?
Well, the point that I was building around towards is that I think Scotland is actually well on its way to being one of the countries that actually really has a discernible scene, with a sound, and a bit of a not just a sound in the pure sense, but a bit of an aesthetic in terms of, like, Emily remarks on this every time it seems we have a Scottish band down. The interplay is like phenomenally sensitive. Like, I think there's an amazing culture that probably also stems maybe from a bit of the folk scene as well, and the amount of open listening and interaction you need for growing up in a session environment, where everything is just sort of thrown in the deep end and start playing music.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Scotland is well on its way to having that sort of sound like Norway, of a really identifiable scene, which is great.
Yeah, I definitely agree, actually. And it's something we not in a sort of self-congratulatory way, but it's something we all definitely talk about a lot. And what I find funny is that, like, there's a lot of Scottish jazz bands going on now. So there's obviously my band and Matt's band, which is kind of very obvious about its folk influences. But then you've got Graham Costello's Strata, which is like kind of inspired by classical minimalism music. And then you've got Animal Society, very inspired by like kind of heavy prog rock kind of stuff. And then you've got Mezcla as well, another different band, which is kind of really takes from African grooves and stuff. But all these bands, at least for me, maybe it's because I know them all really well, and I kind of know their music or whatever, and maybe it's the placebo effect. But all these bands, I can still hear that underlying kind of sound that I think every Scottish band has. I think for some reason, even though all the bands are very different and have a big eclectic range of influences, I do believe that you can still hear the link between like Animal Society and Mezcla, or like Strata and Matt Carmichael Quartet in a way. And I think it is that folk. I think it is that folk influence. It's impossible to ignore.
Yeah, but like you were saying earlier, I think that's because it permeates the whole Scottish music scene in a way that folk music in England certainly doesn't, and in Ireland does to a much higher degree than England certainly. But the jazz scene isn't maybe as broad and as deep in Ireland as it is in Scotland. So it's that right place, like Norway, where those two things are really strongly linked, which is a beautiful thing.
It's really nice. Yeah, definitely. It's really nice. It's a really nice scene to be part of.
Yeah.
And if there was one more thing I was going to say, I would say about it actually, is that I think what's nice as well is that it's like a small scene, but at least in my generation, so like from like ages 28 down to like 19 or whatever, the sort of group that I'm in, everyone's very close knit together. Everyone's like really good friends, even if you're not in a band together, which would be unusual because everyone seems to be in a band together. But if you're not, then you still are friends and you still kind of know that person by their music, and it's a very close knit scene in a way. It's like a lovely scene and group of friends to be a part of in that way.
Yeah, no, fantastic, and yeah, and we look forward to getting lots more great music down from Scotland to the Whiskey Jar in the coming years and months. And before we wrap up, then I normally start these podcasts by asking how you're coping and dealing with lockdown, but we've sort of dealt with a lot of that as we've gone. But outside of lots of writing and you know, practicing some classical music and all of that, how have you been finding the last while in sort of strange situation? And
it's sort of, for me, it comes and goes. I think what's been helping me is trying to have things to do. I don't mean that in the sense that like I'm being hyper productive all the time. I'm like trying to not be too hard on myself if I have days where I'm not productive. But I'm trying to like do things and have like just things to work on. So like, for example, my family, we recently got our Nintendo Wii out of the attic. So one of my things that I've been trying to do is get 100% on Lego Star Wars, which has been very enjoyable. So there's things like that, and also been trying to do a lot of hill walk. I'm actually we were talking about this actually before we started the recording, but just outside my house, you can actually see it from my window. You can see like this big range of hills, and I've been going up into them like every other day or something, just like sometimes for like 6 or 7, 8 hours, just to get away and like kind of gather the thoughts and see some like amazing views. There's actually the biggest hill you can see both. You can't quite see Glasgow, but you can see Edinburgh, and you can almost see coast to coast, which is amazing. That's really nice.
And so is it in dollar still?
Yeah, there's a dollar. So there's the hill range is called the Ochil Hills. I'd really recommend it if you're ever after lockdown looking for like a walking hill range that's not too difficult. Like I think getting up them is hard because they're pretty steep, but they're not really high. So once you're up kind of thing. And then just actually because as a trio we've released this kind of lockdown EP, which was like a live gig, and I think we just wanted to have something to replace the fact that we wouldn't be gigging, so people could order this CD and have a concert in their house. But I hand make all the sleeves for that, and that takes a long time. So that's taken up a lot of time actually. Not that I resent doing it, but that takes up time. But that's good. It's good to have something to do.
Absolutely, yeah. Well,
and Broadchurch is the other thing I've done.
Broadchurch, yeah.
Smash Broadchurch. That is really good, actually. I was very impressed.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thanks so much for joining us, Fergus. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been a pleasure having you down at the Whiskey Jar the last few months.
Thank you.
And we massively look forward to having you back again. So before we depart, and I take my chronically unironed shirt away from everyone's screen.
Mine too.
What's your top tip for everyone else for lockdown? What's your advice to people? What would you recommend to the world at the moment?
I think that what the world wants us, what a lot of people will experience, maybe at least from my view of it, is that you'll feel like you need to do lots of stuff and be really productive because loads of other people are doing things. And I'd say, who cares? Just do what you feel kind of like doing, and try and do the healthiest thing for you to keep your brain kind of in gear. Because you obviously don't want to let everything slop and just watch TV, but you don't want to like torture yourself over not being like hyper productive all the time. So just be kind to yourself and do what you need to do.
Beautiful. Well, Fergus, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon. All the best.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure. Take it easy.
Bye bye. Hello again. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in today and listen to my interview with Fergus. Huge thanks, of course, to Fergus for his time and his beautiful musicianship. Please go and check out Fergus's Bandcamp, and also keep your eyes peeled for the new album coming out on Edition Records at the start of next year. As always, please head over to our Patreon page if you would like to support what we do and access our now fairly expansive range of concerts, podcasts and films. It would be great to see you there. Take care, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.